In this video, I just wanted to give you some help in reading your journal article. I imagine for many of you, this will be the first time that you have ever read a primary research article, or sometimes just called a scientific article. They are dense, they are difficult to read, and they take a lot of time and effort and persistence. Okay, it's going to be a skill you're going to be practicing for the rest of your academic careers. And even if I'm reading a journal article, even if it's within my area of expertise, it is difficult. And on top of that, what we have here is the paper that you guys are going to be reading is from a very high impact journal, perhaps the single highest impact journal, Nature. Okay, so Nature is a very high impact journal, maybe second to or with Science, the Journal of Science. And the article that you're going to be reading the title of it is right here, Chem Elimination Catalysts by Computational Enzyme Design. So when you are looking at a journal article, there is a general format. And the first thing you'll see is the title of the journal article. The name of the journal that article is in is usually up here, so it's in Nature. The authors are listed here. Now there's a lot of authors, but there's two positions that are really important. The first author is important because that's the person who did most of the work. That would usually be the graduate student or the postdoc who is there on a day-to-day basis doing the work. And then the last author, that's really important. That's the person whose lab the research was done in. So when you look at the order of these authors, it's not alphabetical. It has a very specific purpose, okay? Especially that first author, especially that last author. And then everything in between are people who contributed in one way or another. After the authors, we have this first paragraph is called the summary or the abstract. Sometimes it's in bold text here to kind of separate it from everything else. Sometimes it's just another separate sentence. And the abstract tells you, basically summarizes everything that's in the paper. It summarizes the hypothesis, it summarizes the data, and it summarizes the conclusions. So it's really important to really read the abstract very carefully because it'll kind of set you on the mindset of the organization of the rest of the paper. So please don't ignore this, okay? And then, although it's not labeled separately here, then what you have is the introduction. And so that's going to be this, in this paper, it's going to be this one paragraph right here. And the introduction describes to you past research, describes to you the background information that would be important to know before reading the rest of the paper. And then, in Nature articles, they kind of combine both the results section and the discussion. So this would be the results and discussion about the computational design method. This would be the results and discussion of the experimental characterization, and so on until they get to the conclusion. So here is a conclusion. They're going to tell you, they're going to conclude what they found. They're going to tie it into past research. They're going to talk about what it might mean for future research. And then they go to the methods summary. Now this is going to be, if you were a researcher and you wanted to recreate the experiments that were done in this particular study, you'd go to these methods summary and you would read about how they performed each one of those experiments. So the computational design, experimental characterization, in vitro evolution, and so on and so forth. And finally, all the way at the end is the reference section. And so what you'll see is during the introduction and during the conclusion and during the discussion, they will reference information that they got not from themselves, but from other studies. And so you have to, of course, cite that information. And all of those citations is in the reference section here. Okay, then you have acknowledgements. Those are the people that maybe funded the research. You have various other contributions. So maybe people who didn't do enough to earn authorship are thanked here. Now let's talk about this paper specifically. As I said, it is a Nature paper, which means, number one, it's pretty exciting. Nature is a very high impact journal. They only publish things that are exciting. But on top of that, it is also very dense. Nature papers tend to be dense, a lot of information in a very little amount of space. So it's going to take some extra challenges and extra persistence to read this. When you are reading a journal article, do not pass over the figures. And that goes for the same for the textbook as well. When you're reading the textbook, you can get a ton of information from a figure. Look at it carefully. Read that figure legend carefully. And in fact, specifically for this paper, this is a figure legend a figure I very much want you to know well. What they show you is the biochemical reaction that they are making an enzyme to catalyze, and that's shown here. That's the Kemp elimination reaction. And they are, from scratch, trying to build a protein that catalyzes this reaction. There doesn't exist an enzyme in nature that does that. They're building a protein from scratch to do that. So that's very, very important type research. And here in B are the two alternative active sites that they are proposing. Now, those active sites are discussed here in the computational design method, maybe a little bit over here, up here in this paragraph as well. But you really, really, really should look very carefully at these figures and identify what is the substrate, identify what is the enzyme, what are the amino acids of the enzyme, and how they are interacting with the substrate. And all of that is talked about within the figure legend. So anytime you look at a figure, gotta look at that figure legend. On top of that, what you can also do is, okay, I'm reading figure 1, I've read the figure legend, I'm looking at the picture. Well, where are they talking about this within the paper? Well, right here. Here is a place in the paper where they are directing you to figure 1, specifically figure 1b. So you're going to use this as a way of following, right? Where within that paper are they talking about this? Where is the relevance? Okay. A lot of the first half of the questions that I'm asking you to answer regarding this paper can be answered really from this first page. Okay, so really read this abstract and read these first 2 paragraphs carefully, as well as reading the figure legend of this figure 1. It's going to be really important. The next important figure is this table. Okay, and this table shows you all the various proteins they put together, and then shows you the various kinetic attributes, Kcat, Km, and then the efficiency of the enzyme, Kcat over Km. So make sure that you review what Kcat means, what Km means, what Kcat over Km means, and use that to answer the questions that I ask regarding each one of these designs. Now, be careful. Pretty much any journal article that you read will have elements that maybe you just don't understand. You just don't have the background to understand. And you know what? Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes you are only looking for a specific information from a particular scientific paper, and you can, and you, in fact, you have to learn how to gloss over the unimportant details. And I'm going to help you with that. There are elements of this paper that we simply don't talk about in class and that you won't have the background to completely understand. Okay, and so I made sure that I designed the question set that you're going to be using, the questions you're going to be answering, such that they get you to focus on the important information, and so that you don't have to be sort of taken off guard by the information that is not as important. So I'm going to try to focus you on stuff that you should be able to understand, to answer, given what you are learning in class. Okay? So be sure that you are constantly looking at the questions that I'm asking. Be sure that you are constantly reviewing your lecture notes, especially on enzymes, on pKa's, on enzyme kinetics. And be sure to have this article with you when you come to the Zoom meetings. It will help as we go through some of this stuff together in those meetings. Don't forget that this material is going to be on the first exam. And in fact, your answers to the questions that I give you are going to be due on that day of the first exam.